Commander Giwan felt his heart racing as he watched the strange lights flicker across the screen of his ship. The new soul. The emergency message coming through space was broken and hard to understand. But one thing was clear, something terrible was happening out there. 3 entire planets had suddenly gone quiet. Not just their military bases or government buildings, but everything. Every single person, every communication tower, every spaceship, all silent. The last messages they sent were screams for help before the signals just stopped. Lieutenant Minnow wiped sweat from his forehead as he tried to fix the broken transmission. His hands shook as he adjusted the controls. Commander, I'm seeing energy readings that don't make sense. These numbers are impossible. Whatever attacked those planets is using technology we've never seen before. The other crew members on the bridge looked at each other with fear in their eyes. For 50 years, humans had been part of the big galactic family. They had met aliens who could travel faster than light, who could build cities that floated in space, who could cure diseases with a touch. These alien friends were so smart and advanced that humans often felt like children learning from wise teachers. But now, for the first time ever, these super smart aliens were scared. Really scared. The kind of scared that makes your hands shake and your voice crack when you speak. The reports coming from the Galactic Council were terrifying. The enemy wasn't just strong, they were learning. Every time someone shot at them, they figured out how to copy those weapons and make them better. Every defense the aliens built, the enemy broke through it and then used that same defense for themselves. Captain. Salmon walked onto the bridge with heavy steps. Her face looked like someone had just told her the worst news possible. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at her, hoping for good news, but expecting bad news. I just got orders from Earth, she said quietly. I have to stay here and wait. We can't move. We can't help. We just have to sit and watch. She moved to the big screen that showed the tactical situation across this part of space. Red dots marked where the enemy had attacked. There were so many red dots now. She pointed at one area of the screen where several blue dots had just disappeared. The Altarian defense fleet just got wiped out. 6 minutes. That's how long it took for the enemy to destroy one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy. The silence on the bridge was heavy. Everyone knew what this meant. The Altarians were famous across the galaxy for their incredible defensive technology. Their shields could stop almost any weapon. Their ships were fast and smart. Their captains were trained for hundreds of years before they could command even a small vessel, and they were gone in 6 minutes, Commander. Giwan looked around at his crew. These were good people, engineers who could fix anything, pilots who could fly through asteroid fields blindfolded, communications experts who could talk to aliens whose languages sounded like music or thunder. They were humans. They came from a small blue planet that most of the galaxy still considered dangerous and primitive. What could humans possibly do against an enemy that had just crushed the galaxy's best defenders? Admiral Hijin had seen many battles in her 30 years of service, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Standing on the command deck of her ship, the Busan Pride, she watched through the main viewport as something impossible happened right before her eyes. The enemy ships appeared out of nowhere, dropping out of hyperspace like ghosts materializing in the darkness. But these weren't normal ships. They looked like someone had taken pieces of broken glass and twisted metal, then somehow made them alive. The surfaces sparkled and shifted like they were breathing. Crystal formations jutted out at strange angles, while metal parts flowed and moved like liquid. These ships didn't fly like normal spacecraft, instead of the straight, predictable movements of regular vessels. They curved and twisted through space like swimming serpents. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. My God, whispered Lieutenant Yunbi from the sensor station. Are those things alive? Before anyone could answer, the communication system crackled to life. A confident voice filled the bridge. Admiral Kalen, famous commander of the Third Fleet. His forces were the pride of the Galactic Council, equipped with the most advanced weapons and shields in known space. All Council vessels. This is Admiral Kalen. His voice boomed through the speakers. We are engaging hostile forces with standard plasma bombardment. These unknown ships won't know what hit them. Admiral Hajan felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Something about this felt wrong. The enemy ships weren't running or trying to hide. Instead, they were just floating there, almost like they were waiting for something. The Council fleet opened. Fire with everything they had. Bright beams of superheated plasma shot through space, lighting up the darkness like deadly rainbows. These weapons could melt through the strongest armor plating in seconds. They had ended wars and brought peace to 100 worlds. But as Haijin watched in horror, something impossible happened. The crystal ships didn't explode. They didn't even try to dodge. Instead, they just absorbed the plasma fire like sponges soaking up water. With each hit, their crystal hulls glowed brighter and brighter, like they were somehow feeding on the energy. "Sir," Tactical Officer Jinwoo's voice was barely a whisper. His face had gone completely white. "The enemy vessels they're charging their weapons." "That's impossible," Haijin said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was true. The crystal ships began firing back, and the weapons they used were identical to what the Council fleet had just shot at them. Same color, same intensity, same destructive power, but somehow they were stronger, more focused, more deadly. "They're learning," Jinwoo whispered, his hand shaking as he worked his controls. "Every single shot our allies fire, those things study it, copy it, and make it better." What followed wasn't a battle, was a massacre. The Council ships, with all their advanced technology and centuries of military experience, were helpless. Every tactic they tried, every weapon they fired, every defensive strategy they used, the crystal ships learned from it all within minutes and turned it against them. Ships that had served for decades, that had been homes to thousands of crew members, exploded one by one. The screams over the communication channels were terrible to hear. In less than 20 minutes, the entire Third Fleet was gone. Only 2 ships managed to escape into hyperspace. Carrying the horrifying news back to the Council, the galaxy's greatest military force had been destroyed by an enemy that learned faster than they could fight. The Great Council chamber on Station Alpha had never seen anything like this. For 14 straight hours, representatives from hundreds of different alien species had been shouting, arguing, and desperately trying to find a solution to the greatest threat their galaxy had ever faced. The chamber was massive, with curved walls that rose up like the inside of a giant egg. Floating holographic displays showed the terrible truth in real time. Red dots spreading across the galaxy map like a deadly disease. Each red dot represented an entire star system that had gone silent. Billions of lives, simply gone. Counselor Yeji sat in the human section, which was tucked away in a corner of the chamber. Humans were still considered newcomers to galactic society, so they didn't get the fancy seats near the front. She watched as the most advanced species in the galaxy, beings who could live for thousands of years, who could manipulate matter with their minds, who had mastered technologies that seemed like magic, completely lost their composure. The Zilithians, with their beautiful crystal bodies, were flashing angry colors as they argued with the Mortations, who looked like walking trees, but were actually brilliant strategists. The aquatic depth swimmers were making clicking sounds that their translators turned into very rude words. Everyone was scared, and fear was making them angry. At the center of it all stood High Counselor Vexhai, tall alien with blue scales. And for arms, he was usually calm and wise, but today his hands were shaking as he tried to control the chaos in the chamber. "Order! Please, we need order!" he called out, his voice cracking with stress. His universal translator made his words sound desperate in dozens of different languages at once. A holographic display behind him updated with new information, and the news was worse than ever. The Devourers have consumed 17 entire worlds. In just 6 days, Vexai announced. Our most powerful fleets have tried to stop them, but every attack we make only teaches them how to become stronger. The counselor from the Altarian Defense Force stood up, his voice bitter with defeat. My people's fleet was the pride of the galaxy. We had weapons that could crack planets, shields that could stop supernovas. The Devourers destroyed us in 6 minutes, and then started using our own weapons against the next fleet. What about the quantum disruption protocol? Suggested a representative who looked like a floating cloud of glowing gas. They adapted to it in 14 minutes, replied another counselor. The psychic warfare division is gone. The Devourers somehow learned to copy our mental attacks and use them against us. The arguing started again, louder and more desperate than before. Some species wanted to evacuate their entire civilizations. 2 other galaxies? Others suggested surrender. Few were talking about destroying their own planets rather than let the Devourers take them. Yeji had been listening to all of this for hours. She thought about her home planet Earth, about the humans who were considered too violent, too unpredictable, too primitive to really belong in this advanced galactic community. The other species tolerated humans, but they didn't respect them. They saw humans as chaotic children who solved problems by hitting them with hammers instead of using elegant solutions. Finally, she couldn't stay quiet anymore. Perhaps, Yeji said, standing up slowly, it's time to consider alternative approaches to warfare. The massive chamber fell completely silent. Hundreds of alien eyes turned to look at the human representative. Some of the counselors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They remembered the reports about how humans had fought their way off their dangerous home planet, how they had survived in a galaxy that should have killed them, how they approached problems in ways that no civilized species would ever consider. The silence stretched on, heavy with possibility and fear. General Dong Yun looked out at the faces of 50 human fleet commanders gathered in the briefing room of Earth's biggest space station. These men and women had spent their entire careers trying to prove that humans belonged in the galaxy alongside species that were thousands of years more advanced. They had learned to fight like the aliens fought, using energy weapons and sophisticated tactics that made sense on paper. Now, everything they had learned was useless. Behind the general, massive screens showed the terrible truth. The Devourers were moving through space like a perfectly organized machine. They hit one star system, learned everything they could from the defenders, then moved to the next system with new knowledge and better weapons. Precise and absolutely unstoppable. Ladies and gentlemen, General Dong Yun began, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. Something incredible has happened. The galaxy's smartest species, beings who can live for thousands of years, who built cities in the hearts of stars, who mastered technologies we can barely understand, they've asked us for help. A few of the commanders shifted in their seats. Captain Mingy, who had fought in 3 different galactic conflicts, looked confused. Sir, that doesn't make sense. These civilizations have weapons that can destroy planets. They have shields that can stop anything. Why would they need us? General. Dong Yun walked over to the tactical display and pointed at the red zones spreading across the galaxy map. Because they've tried everything they know how to do. They sent their best diplomats to negotiate. The Devourers consumed them. They used their most advanced energy weapons. The Devourers absorbed the energy and got stronger. They tried logical military strategies. The Devourers learned those strategies and used them better. Commander Bile, a veteran of the Outer Rim conflicts, raised her hand. General, if their energy weapons only make these things stronger, what advantage could we possibly have? Oh, our technology is primitive compared to theirs. The general's expression changed, and for the first time in the meeting, he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a person gets when they're about to do something completely crazy. They've never faced an enemy that doesn't make sense, he said. Every single adaptation the Devourers have made is based on logical military thinking. Reasonable tactics, predictable strategies. But we humans, he gestured around the room at all the assembled officers, we specialize in controlled chaos. That room was quiet as everyone tried to understand what he meant. Fleet Admiral Saijin, the highest-ranking naval officer in the human fleet, stepped forward. His weathered face showed the scars of someone who had fought in the brutal wars that brought humanity to space. What the general is saying is simple. We're going to fight like humans, not like civilized aliens. He turned to address the entire room. Effective immediately, all human vessels are getting completely refitted, stripping out every plasma cannon, every energy shield, every piece of advanced alien technology we've been using for the past 50 years. The commanders looked at each other in shock. Captain Mingy spoke up again. Sir, what are we replacing them with? Admiral Seojin's smile matched the general's. We're going back to basics. Kinetic weapons, good old-fashioned bullets and missiles that physically hit things. Chemical explosives that blow up on contact, nuclear warheads. And most importantly, good old-fashioned human stupidity. Commander Bile looked skeptical. Sir, you're talking about fighting with primitive weapons against an enemy that just destroyed the galaxy's most advanced fleets? Exactly, said General Dong Yun. The Devourers have learned to counter every logical weapon and strategy in the galaxy. But they've never encountered something completely illogical. They've never faced an enemy that makes decisions based on gut instinct, desperation, and pure, stubborn human refusal to give up. The briefing room began to buzz with excited conversation as the commanders started to understand what they were being asked to do. Captain? Hannah gripped the armrests of her command chair as her ship, the Soul's Fury, dropped out of hyperspace into the Kepler system. Through the main view screen, she could see the crystalline enemy ships floating in perfect formation, their surfaces gleaming like deadly jewels in the starlight. Her destroyer had been completely rebuilt in the past week. Gone were the sleek plasma cannons and energy shields that had made it look like every other ship in the galactic fleet. Instead, the Soul's Fury now bristled with weapons that looked like they belonged in a museum. Railguns, missile launchers, and old-fashioned projectile cannons that fired solid chunks of metal. Captain, I'm reading 12 Devourer vessels ahead, reported Lieutenant Hunwoo from the sensor station. They're arranging themselves in a standard defensive pattern. Weapons Officer Yemen looked up from his console with excitement in his eyes. All weapons ready, Captain. Railguns loaded with depleted uranium slugs, missile tubes armed with conventional high explosives. Everything's ready to go. Hannah watched as the Devourer ships began to shift and change. Their crystalline hulls started glowing with a familiar light. They were preparing their adaptive systems, getting ready to absorb and learn from whatever energy weapons the humans threw at them. They're charging their plasma absorption arrays, reported the tactical officer, just like they did with every other fleet they've faced. But this time was different. The Devourers were preparing for energy weapons that weren't coming. Target the lead ship, Hannah ordered. Fire the railguns. The Soul's Fury shuddered as two massive railguns fired simultaneously. Instead of beams of energy, they launched solid metal projectiles at incredible speeds, chunks of depleted uranium moving so fast they were almost invisible. The Devourer ship's adaptive systems tried to respond, but there was nothing to adapt to. The metal slugs weren't energy that could be absorbed or redirected. They were just solid matter moving at tremendous speed. And when they hit the crystalline hull, the physics were simple and brutal. The impact sent cracks spider-webbing across the enemy ship's surface. For the first time since the invasion began, a Devourer vessel actually looked damaged. They're confused, shouted Yemen. Their systems are trying to process what just happened, but they can't figure out how to counter. A chunk of metal. Fire everything, Hannah yelled. Don't give them time to think. The Soul's Fury erupted in chaos. Railguns fired uranium slugs while missile launchers sent old-fashioned explosive warheads screaming through space. Chemical rockets left trails of fire as they raced toward the enemy formations. The ship's point defense systems normally used to stop incoming missiles now fired thousands of bullets per minute at any Devourer ship that came too close. Other human ships joined the battle. The space around Kepler system became a madhouse of flying metal and explosions. Fighter pilot Sun Ho roared past the bridge windows in his modified interceptor, machine guns blazing as he sprayed bullets at a crystal ship's hull. His fighter was deploying clouds of metallic chaff, tiny pieces of aluminum that confused the Devourer sensors and made it impossible for them to target him properly. This is insane, laughed Lieutenant Hunwoo as he watched the tactical display. Half our weapons are held together with duct tape and prayers, but they're working. The Devourers tried to adapt, but there was nothing logical to learn from. One human ship was ramming enemy vessels with reinforced hulls, while another was firing nuclear torpedoes that exploded on contact. A third ship had somehow mounted actual cannons on its hull, the kind that fired solid cannonballs like pirates used centuries ago, for the first time since the invasion began. Devourer ships weren't absorbing attacks and getting stronger. Instead, they were exploding, breaking apart, and actually retreating. "Captain, we're getting reports from the other ships," called the communications officer. "Enemy vessels are withdrawing from the system. They're actually running away." Hannah couldn't believe it. The galaxy's most terrifying enemy, the force that had destroyed every advanced fleet sent against them, was being defeated by humans using weapons that were thousands of years old. "Looks like being primitive has its advantages," she said with a grin. The inside of the Devourer ship was like walking through a living crystal cave. The walls pulsed with strange lights, and the floor felt warm under Sergeant Young-Ho's boots. But the strangest thing wasn't the alien architecture. It was the music echoing through the corridors at ear-splitting volume. Beethoven's Symphony. No, 9 blasted from the speakers built into Young-Ho's combat armor. The dramatic classical music creating chaos in the ship's systems. The crystalline creatures that lived inside these vessels were trying to understand the sound patterns. But human music didn't follow any logical mathematical sequence they could process. "Remember the plan," Young-Ho shouted to his Marine team. As they moved through the twisting hallways. "Nothing logical. Switch weapons every 30 seconds. Keep them guessing." The Devourers had learned to counter every military tactic in the galaxy. But they had never encountered humans who deliberately made no sense. Private Hiram emptied her shotgun into a crystal creature that was trying to block their path. Then, immediately threw the weapon aside and pulled out a plasma cutter, a tool normally used to repair ships. The creature's adaptive systems tried to figure out what kind of weapon it was facing. But before they could respond, Hiram had already switched to throwing hand grenades. Time called Corporal Taeyun, dropping his rifle and activating a flamethrower. The crystalline beings recoiled from the primitive fire, their advanced minds unable to comprehend why anyone would use such an ancient weapon in space combat. Behind them, Ibit Jihoon was wielding a crowbar like a medieval knight's sword, while Specialist Bowman had somehow found an old-fashioned bow and arrow and was shooting explosive-tipped arrows at the enemy. The Devourer's computer systems were going crazy, trying to analyze and counter weapons that belonged in a history. Museum. The Marines moved through the ship like a tornado of controlled chaos. Every 30 seconds, they switched tactics completely. One moment they were using high-tech energy weapons, the next, they were throwing rocks. Sergeant Young-Ho had even brought a baseball bat, which he swung with enthusiastic battle cries that his suit speakers amplified into ear-splitting war songs. "This is the most fun I've had in years," laughed Corporal Taeyun, as he used his flamethrower to melt through a crystalline barrier. "These things can copy our weapons, but they can't copy crazy." Meanwhile, high above the captured ship, Captain Jung-Soo was making his own contribution to the chaos. His frigate, the Daegu's Hammer, had taken heavy damage during the battle. Engines were failing, the weapons were offline, and the hull was cracked in 17 places. Any rational military commander would have ordered an immediate retreat. Captain Jung-Soo decided to ram his ship directly into the enemy command vessel. "All hands abandon ship," he announced over the intercom. "Get to the escape pods now. I'm going to show these crystal monsters what humans do when we're backed into a corner." His crew raced through the corridors, diving into escape pods that shot away from the doomed frigate like rockets. But Captain Jung-Soo stayed at the controls, steering his dying ship toward the massive Devourer command vessel. "This is the Daegu's Hammer," he broadcast on all frequencies, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. "You want to learn from us? Well, try learning from this. Sometimes the best strategy is pure, stubborn human stupidity." The frigate's reactor was already overloading from the battle damage. When it hit the enemy command ship at full speed, the explosion lit up the entire battlefield like a new star. Other human ships saw what Captain Jung-Soo had done and started coming up with their own impossible tactics. The destroyer Soul's Pride began spinning like a top while firing in all directions. The cruiser Bison's Revenge was flying backwards while dropping mines from its cargo bay. Fighter squadrons were playing music over their communications and performing aerobatic stunts that made no tactical sense but confused the enemy sensors completely. The Devourers, for all their ability to adapt and learn, had never faced an enemy that refused to fight logically. Their advanced computer systems were overloading, trying to find patterns in human behavior that simply didn't exist. For the first time in the war, the galaxy's most feared enemy was completely helpless against pure human unpredictability: intelligence. Officer Yunji had been alone in her tiny stealth ship for 3 weeks, drifting silently through enemy territory like a ghost. Her ship, the Silent Observer, was designed to be invisible, no heat signature, no energy emissions, just a small metal box floating in the darkness of space. For days, she had been listening to the strange signals that passed between Devourer ships. The crystal creatures communicated in ways that hurt human ears to hear, high-pitched screeches and low rumbles that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But Yunji was one of the best code breakers in the human fleet, and slowly she had begun to understand what she was hearing. What she discovered changed everything. "Admiral Jiho, come in," she whispered into her communications array, hoping the signal would reach the human fleet without being detected by the enemy. "I've cracked their communication system. You need to hear this." The response came back through. "Heavy static," says Admiral Jiho aboard the Inchin's Pride. "What have you found, Yunji?" Her hand shook as she prepared to share the most important discovery of the war. "Sir, they're not individual ships making their own decisions. There's something controlling all of them, a central coordination node. It's like a massive brain that tells every single Devourer what to do and how to adapt." The implications hit her even as she spoke the words. Every time the Devourers learned to counter a new weapon or tactic, that information was instantly shared with every other Devourer in the galaxy. That's why they adapted so quickly. They weren't learning individually. They were all connected to one giant mind. "Where is this central node located?" Admiral Jiho's voice was tense with excitement. Yunji pulled up the data she had gathered. "It's inside a fortress structure in the heart of their territory. Sir, this thing is massive, bigger than Earth's moon. And according to my scans, it's already adapted defenses against every conventional weapon the galactic fleets have used." On the flagship Inchin's Pride, Admiral Jiho stared at the tactical data his officers had spread across the command table. The fortress was indeed enormous, surrounded by layers of defensive systems that had learned to counter plasma weapons, energy shields, quantum torpedoes, and every other advanced technology the galaxy could throw at it. "This is it," he said. To his staff officers, "It's why we can't win a normal war against them. Every time we attack, we just teach them how to defend better." Commander Sunmi, his tactical advisor, leaned over the holographic display. "Sir, if we could somehow destroy this central node, would that stop the Devourer's ability to adapt?" "More than that," Admiral Jiho replied. "If we cut off the brain, every Devourer in the galaxy would lose their coordination. They'd go from being a perfectly organized enemy to just individual crystal creatures with no way to share information." The room fell quiet as everyone realized what this meant. The war could potentially be won with a single successful strike. "The problem," continued the Admiral, "is that this fortress has already learned to defend against every weapon we know about. Any conventional attack would just make it stronger." Captain Dowan, one of the fleet's most experienced officers, spoke up. "Sir, conventional wisdom would say we need to plan a careful surgical strike with our most advanced weapons." Admiral Jiho smiled the same grim smile that had become common among human commanders. "And that's exactly why we're not going to do that. Conventional wisdom is what got the galaxy into this mess in the first place." He turned to his communications officer. "Send a message to Earth Command and every human ship in this sector. Tell them we need volunteers for a suicide mission. We're going to attack the most heavily defended fortress in Devourer space with the most ridiculous plan anyone has ever conceived." The response came back within minutes, and it shocked everyone on the bridge. Every single human ship in the sector volunteered immediately, not just the military vessels, but cargo ships, research vessels, passenger transports, and even a few civilian yachts whose owners had somehow made it to the front lines. The message logs showed hundreds of responses, all saying the same thing: "Count us in." Admiral Jaho looked around at his officers, seeing the same mixture of pride and amazement on every face. "Well," he said, "looks like we're going to give those crystal monsters the most chaotic, it's unpredictable, and absolutely insane attack in military history." The battle for the Devourer Hive began like no military engagement in galactic history. Captain Sungmin sat in the cockpit of his tiny fighter, watching as the massive enemy fortress grew larger on his screen. His ship was packed with enough antimatter to level a small city, and he was flying it straight into the heart of the most dangerous place in the galaxy. But the strangest part wasn't the suicide mission, it was what was coming through his radio. "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Sungmin recited into his microphone, broadcasting Shakespeare's poetry on every frequency his ship could reach. "Thou art more lovely and more temperate." The Devourer Fortress was trying to analyze the transmission, its adaptive systems working frantically to understand if this was some kind of coded military communication. It was just poetry, beautiful, meaningless. Completely random human poetry that served no tactical purpose whatsoever. Behind Sungmin, the entire human fleet was creating the most chaotic battle scene anyone had ever witnessed. The destroyer Gangnam's Fury was flying in perfect spirals, while firing its cannons in random directions. The cruiser Dejian's Hope had stopped moving completely in the middle of the battlefield and was launching tiny fighter squadrons armed with machine guns and rockets that belonged in a museum. Admiral Geo's flagship, the Inchen's Pride, was spinning end over end while playing classical music at maximum volume from its external speakers. Other ships were flying backwards, upside down, or in zigzag patterns that made absolutely no sense from a military standpoint. Counselor Yage watched the madness unfold from her observation vessel, safely positioned behind the main battle lines. As a diplomat, she had seen many military operations, but never anything like this. "This is completely insane." She transmitted to the human fleet commanders. "Your pilots are acting like they've lost their minds." Colonel Nahan's voice came back through the communications, filled with laughter even as she manually steered a nuclear torpedo through the fortress's defensive maze. "Exactly. Sanity is what we humans do best. The Devourers can adapt to logical tactics, but they can't adapt to pure chaos." The fortress was indeed struggling to respond. Its defensive systems had learned to counter every type of coordinated attack in the Galactic Military Handbook. But the humans weren't using any tactics from the handbook. They were just flying around doing whatever came to mind, switching weapons and strategies every few seconds, with no pattern or logic. Captain Sungmin continued his poetry recital as he dodged through the fortress's defensive fire. "But thy eternal summer shall not fade," he quoted, while performing a barrel roll that served no tactical purpose except to confuse the enemy targeting systems. The fortress was massive, bigger than Earth's moon, covered in crystal spires and defensive batteries that could destroy entire fleets, but its weapons were designed to track and destroy ships that moved in predictable patterns. They couldn't hit targets that were flying like drunken birds, changing direction randomly every few seconds. Fighter pilot Gile was flying his ship backwards while firing a mounted crossbow, an actual medieval crossbow, at crystal defense towers. Bomber pilot Yayan had somehow rigged his cargo bay to drop thousands of rubber balls mixed with actual explosives, creating a cloud of confusion that the fortress's sensors couldn't process. As Sungmin got closer to the fortress's core, the enemy fire intensified. His fighter's hull began glowing red-hot as defensive lasers tried to cut him apart, but he kept flying forward, still reciting poetry, still broadcasting random human culture into space. For Earth, he screamed as his ship finally broke through the last layer of defenses and reached the fortress's central core. For humanity, for poetry and chaos and everything that makes no sense, he detonated the antimatter charge at point-blank range. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away, but more importantly, it severed the quantum communication links that connected every devourer across the galaxy. In an instant, the hive mind that had coordinated their perfect adaptations was gone. Suddenly, every devourer ship in the galaxy was alone, confused. and unable to share information with its fellows. The tide of the war had finally turned. 6 months had passed since. The destruction of the Devourer hive mind and the galaxy was finally at peace again. The massive chamber of Galactic Council Station. Alpha had been decorated with flags and banners from hundreds of different worlds, all gathered to witness something that had never happened before in galactic history. Admiral Jawan stood at the center of the Great Hall, wearing his crisp new uniform with the golden stars that marked his recent promotion. Around him, representatives from every major species in the galaxy watched with expressions of respect and gratitude, emotions that humans had rarely seen directed toward them before the war. The ceremony was unlike anything the Council had ever held. Usually their meetings were formal, quiet affairs where diplomats spoke in careful, measured tones about trade agreements and territorial disputes. Today, there was genuine emotion in the air. The galaxy had come closer to total destruction than anyone wanted to admit. And everyone knew that humanity had saved them all. High Counselor Vex High, the tall blue-scaled leader of the council, stepped forward to address the assembled crowd. His forearms were steady now, no longer shaking with the fear and desperation that had marked the dark days of the war. Representatives of the galaxy, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced sound systems. We gather today to formally welcome humanity into the inner circle of the Galactic Council. But more than that, we gather to acknowledge a truth that many of us were too proud to see before. He turned to look directly at Admiral Giwan. Your species has shown us that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in perfection, logical thinking, or advanced technology. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in the willingness to embrace controlled chaos, to think in ways that make no sense to anyone else, to never give up, even when the situation seems hopeless. The applause that followed was thunderous. Species that had once looked down on humans as primitive warmongers were now clapping and cheering for the Deathworlders who had saved their civilizations. In the observation deck above the main ceremony, Captain Solomon watched the proceedings with a mixture of pride and amusement. Through the transparent walls of the deck, she could see human families who had come to witness this historic moment. But what caught her attention wasn't the adults. It was the children. A group of young humans from the colony ships were playing in a corner of the observation area, and their game made Solomon smile. They were acting out space battles. But the tactics they were using would have given any traditional military academy instructor a heart attack. I'm going to ram my ship into yours while playing music, shouted 8-year-old Minseo, spinning around with his arms outstretched like he was piloting a fighter. I'm going to fly backwards and shoot rubber balls at you, replied his friend Jisoo, pretending to fire imaginary weapons in random directions. Their parents watched the game with the kind of fond tolerance that only humans seem to possess. Other species' children played logical games with clear rules and predictable outcomes. Human children invented chaos and called it fun. Admiral Jiho was just telling me about the situation in the Outer Rim. Captain Soman overheard one parent saying to another, apparently there's some kind of trade dispute between the crystal miners and the gas harvesters that's getting out of hand. Sounds like they might need some human-style problem-solving, replied the other parent with a knowing smile. The phrase had become popular throughout the galaxy. In the months since the war ended, when conventional diplomacy failed, when logical solutions didn't work, when a situation was so complicated that normal methods just made it worse, that's when governments and corporations started asking for human-style problem-solving. It usually meant sending in humans who would approach the problem in completely unexpected ways, ignore all the established protocols, and somehow find solutions that no one else had thought of. Down in the main ceremony hall, the formal proceedings were coming to an end. But everyone present understood that this wasn't just about adding another species to the Council's inner circle. This was about recognizing that the galaxy's greatest strength came from its diversity, including the diversity of thought that only humanity seemed to provide. The galaxy was safe again. But the Council had learned something important. Sometimes you need Deathworlders to save civilization itself.